I am Zoya, 33 years old, and a senior advisor at one of the most ruthless private equity firms on Wall Street. I walked into my father's hotel gala only to hear my stepmother tell security to remove me. I left without a single word. Then I logged into my secure network, froze their $17 million merger, and legally moved the hotel, the land, and all their funds into my blind trust. Minutes later, 78 missed calls lit up my phone. By midnight, they were pounding on my penthouse door. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who severely underestimated your worth. Growing up in Baldwin Hills, my family projected an image of absolute perfection. My father Marcus loved to parade around Los Angeles as a self-made millionaire, a shining example of Black excellence in the hospitality industry. The reality, however, was a carefully constructed lie. The wealth, the status, and the very foundation of his empire came from my late mother. She was the actual brains and financial muscle behind everything. When she passed away, my father wasted no time moving his mistress Valerie into our home. Valerie brought along her daughter Sienna, who was quickly elevated to the status of the golden child. I was shoved into the shadows, treated as an unwanted reminder of the woman whose shoes Valerie could never truly fill. They spent my teenage years draining my mother's resources while telling me I was a burden. When it came time for college, my father refused to pay my tuition. He claimed he needed the money to fund Sienna's lavish sorority lifestyle and her expensive European vacations. I worked double shifts as a waitress just to survive, eventually clawing my way into a top financial firm through sheer grit and sleepless nights. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea they had simply sharpened me into a weapon. Tonight was supposed to be my father's crowning achievement. The Sterling Hotel, the crown jewel of our supposed family legacy, was celebrating its 30th anniversary. More importantly, tonight was the official announcement of a massive merger. Preston, the arrogant white hedge fund manager who had recently married Sienna, was bringing a $17 million investment to the table. Preston came from what he liked to call old money, though anyone with actual wealth knew his family was hanging on by a thread of past glory. He treated my father with thinly veiled condescension, viewing our family as a stepping stone to save his own failing funds. My father, blinded by his desperate need for high society validation, practically worshipped the ground Preston walked on. I pulled my car up to the valet stand at the Sterling. The grand facade of the hotel glowed under the warm Los Angeles night sky. Crystal chandeliers blazed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the hundreds of wealthy investors and socialites mingling inside. I stepped out of my car wearing a tailored black evening gown that cost more than my father's first mortgage. I did not dress up to impress them. I dressed up for the funeral of their financial empire. I walked through the revolving brass doors, and the noise of the gala washed over me. Jazz music drifted from a live band in the corner, mixing with the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of expensive conversations. The grand ballroom was draped in gold and white floral arrangements. Banners celebrating the legacy of Marcus Williams hung from the vaulted ceilings. It made my stomach turn. Every brick of this building, every crystal in those chandeliers was paid for by my mother's sweat and blood. Seeing my father take sole credit for her genius was a bitter pill I had swallowed for years. But tonight that pill was going to be shoved right back down his throat. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and scanned the room. It did not take long to spot them. My father stood near the center stage wearing a custom tuxedo, laughing loudly at a joke Preston had just made. Preston stood tall and smug, holding a glass of scotch, surveying the room with the arrogance of a man who believed he owned everyone in it. Beside them stood Sienna, dripping in diamonds that I knew were paid for by embezzling from the hotel's employee scholarship fund. Then my eyes locked onto Valerie. My stepmother wore an emerald green dress that screamed for attention. She was holding court with a group of investors' wives, undoubtedly spinning tales about her difficult stepdaughter who refused to participate in the family business. When she turned her head and saw me standing by the ice sculpture, her fake smile instantly vanished. Her eyes widened, scanning my appearance from head to toe, taking in the designer gown and the quiet confidence radiating from my posture. I did not look like the exhausted, stressed-out college student she had kicked out 10 years ago. I looked like a woman who could buy and sell her entire existence before breakfast. The underlying tension in the room shifted immediately. I could feel the invisible ripple effect as my father noticed Valerie's expression and turned to follow her gaze. His face hardened. Preston leaned down to whisper something in Sienna's ear, and my sister's perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure panic and disgust. They had not invited me. They had specifically excluded my name from the guest list to ensure their perfect night went without a hitch. But I did not need an invitation to enter a building I technically owned. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my cold water and began walking directly toward them without any fear. The final countdown to their inevitable destruction had officially begun tonight. I did not slow my pace as I approached the center of the ballroom. Valerie broke away from her circle of wealthy wives and intercepted me near a towering display of white orchids. She moved with a desperate kind of urgency, her emerald dress swishing around her ankles. She planted herself directly in my path, blocking my access to my father and the investors. Her smile was stretched so tight it looked painful, but her voice dropped into a venomous whisper, meant only for me. "What are you doing here, Zoya?" Valerie hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward the nearby businessman. "You are not on the guest list. This is a private corporate event, not a soup kitchen. I thought we made it perfectly clear 10 years ago that you were no longer welcome to ride on your father's coattails." I looked down at her. She was wearing my mother's vintage Cartier necklace. The absolute audacity of this woman was staggering. I simply smiled. "I do not need an invitation to stand in my mother's hotel." "Valerie," I replied, my voice calm and perfectly modulated. Valerie scoffed a harsh sound that made an older investor nearby turn his head. She immediately adjusted her posture, plastering on a fake maternal expression. She leaned in close, her perfume suffocatingly sweet. "You think putting on a nice dress changes who you are," she whispered fiercely. "You are still that same pathetic girl scrubbing tables at that diner because she could not afford textbooks. Marcus cut you off because you refused to support Sienna and you refused to be a team player. You do not belong here. You have never belonged here." I felt a brief flash of the old pain, the sting of being cast aside, while Sienna received a brand new luxury car for barely passing her freshman classes. But that pain had long since hardened into unbreakable armor. I looked past Valerie directly at Sienna, who was now pulling Preston by the arm toward us. Sienna had perfectly timed her approach. Recognizing that several high-net-worth investors, including Thomas Harrington, a major player in the Chicago real estate market, were watching the exchange, Sienna immediately went into her favorite performance, the fragile victim. "Oh my God, Zoya," she gasped, placing a manicured hand over her chest. "Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to ruin my husband's big night? We literally begged you to be part of this family and you walked away. Now you just show up to cause a scene because you are jealous." She leaned into Preston, burying her face in his shoulder. "It is so unfair, Preston. She always does this. She always tries to make me look bad." Preston wrapped a protective arm around his wife, looking at me with absolute disdain. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his silk tie. He looked at me, not as a professional equal, but as an annoyance, an uninvited pest who had wandered into a country club. "Listen to me, Zoya," he said, using that condescending authoritative tone he probably used on junior analysts. "I know you have had a hard life out there in the real world, and you harbor a lot of resentment toward Marcus for focusing his resources on Sienna, but this is a multi-million-dollar business environment. We are dealing with serious capital tonight. You cannot just crash a gala because you are looking for a handout." Mr. Harrington, who had drifted closer, raised an eyebrow at Preston's harsh words. Valerie, noticing the investor, immediately tried to spin the narrative, playing the role of the long-suffering mother. Oh, Mr. Harrington, I am so sorry you have to witness this family drama, Valerie said, placing a hand on her chest. This is Marcus' estranged daughter Zoya. We tried everything to help her, but she chose a different path. She has always struggled with our success. We pay for her therapy, but some people just cannot handle seeing their sister thrive. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost applauded. They had spent years perfecting this story. To the outside world, I was the bitter, unstable daughter who could not handle the pressure of high society. Sienna was the angel and Valerie was the saint who tried to hold the family together. Mr. Harrington gave me a look of mild pity. It is a shame, he murmured, adjusting his glasses. Family business can be complicated. But Preston is right. This is a night for celebrating the merger. Preston smirked, empowered by the older investors. Validation. He took a step forward, invading my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. Look, he said, lowering his voice, so only our small circle could hear. I am going to ask you nicely to leave before this gets embarrassing for you. Marcus and I are about to finalize a $17 million mezzanine debt transfer that will elevate this entire family. My family. I will not let you jeopardize my investors' money with your ghetto behavior. Go back to whatever entry-level job you managed to scrape together and leave the real business to the adults. I stood perfectly still. The sheer arrogance of this mediocre hedge fund manager was almost comical. He truly believed his white privilege and old money aesthetic made him untouchable. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor, and my hand was resting right on the lever. I looked past him, staring directly at my father, who was actively pretending he did not see me. I turned back to my stepmother. Enjoy my mother's necklace tonight. Valerie, it is going to clash with a prison jumpsuit. You thought you could erase my existence and build your empire on my mother's grave. You thought I was just collateral damage, but I have spent the last 10 years learning how to dismantle everything you love. Your absolute greed is your ultimate downfall. Have a wonderful evening. Valerie gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if she had been physically struck by my words. Preston immediately shifted his stance, positioning his tall frame directly between me and his trembling wife. His face flushed with that specific shade of indignant rage reserved exclusively for men who have never been challenged. You listened to me very carefully, he growled, stepping so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. You might think you can come in here and throw around empty threats, but you are completely out of your depth. We are finalizing a corporate restructuring that involves serious institutional capital. My family has been moving money in this city since before you were born. You are nothing but a bitter, disgruntled employee, lashing out, because you could not make the cut in the real business world. I maintained my eye contact with him, refusing to shrink under his towering height. You talk a lot about your family capital. Preston, I replied, my tone dangerously quiet. But we both know you are desperate to close this deal tonight because your own investors are breathing down your neck. You are trying to use my father's hotel as a life raft for your sinking fund. Preston's jaw tightened, and I saw a flicker of genuine panic behind his arrogant facade. Before he could retaliate, the crowd parted slightly. My father had finally decided to intervene. Marcus strode over his expensive tuxedo, catching the light of the chandeliers. He was sweating slightly, a clear sign that the pressure of the evening was getting to him. He looked at Valerie, then at Preston, and finally at me. For a brief second, I searched his eyes, looking for any trace of the man who used to read me bedtime stories before my mother died. I looked for a shred of parental instinct or basic human decency. Instead, I found only calculating cowardice. What is going on here? Marcus demanded, his voice pitched perfectly to sound commanding yet discreet. Mr. Harrington is watching us. We cannot afford any public spectacles right now. Marcus, your estranged daughter is harassing my wife. Preston snapped instantly, taking control of the narrative. She is throwing around wild accusations and threatening our merger. I expect you to handle this immediately, or my partners and I will walk away from the negotiation table right now. My father blanched at the threat of losing his precious $17 million lifeline. He turned to me, his expression hardening into a mask of pure rejection. "Zoya, you are completely out of line," he said, pointing a trembling finger at the exit. "You were not invited to this gala. This night is about the future of our family business, and you surrendered your right to be part of that future a long time ago. You need to leave immediately before you do irreparable damage to my reputation." "Your reputation," I echoed, letting a cold laugh escape my lips. "You mean the reputation my mother built for you while you were busy spending her money on your mistress." I gestured toward Valerie, who was now clutching my father's arm like a frightened bird. "You are willing to let this arrogant hedge fund manager disrespect your own flesh and blood just so you can pretend to be a titan of industry." "That is enough!" Valerie shrieked, her voice breaking through the sophisticated hum of the ballroom. She waved her hand frantically toward the entrance, catching the attention of the hotel security detail. "Security, remove this woman right now. She is trespassing and threatening our guests." Four large security guards wearing sharp black suits and earpieces immediately broke away from their posts and marched toward our group. The head guard, a tall, broad-shouldered man, approached with a stern expression. His name tag read Reynolds. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to step toward the exit," he said, his hand hovering near his radio. "Please do not make us use force." Sienna peeked out from behind Preston's shoulder, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Bye, Zoya," she whispered mockingly. "Try not to scratch the marble floors on your way out." Preston crossed his arms over his chest, radiating smug satisfaction. "Trash always takes itself out eventually," he remarked loud enough for the nearby investors to hear. The guards stepped closer, forming a tight perimeter around me. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath, watching the drama unfold. They expected me to scream. They expected me to throw a tantrum, claw at my father, or beg for mercy. They expected the angry black woman stereotype they could easily dismiss and mock. I gave them absolutely nothing. I smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the skirt of my designer gown and adjusted my clutch. I looked at my father one last time, sealing his fate in my mind. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. He had made his choice. I turned to the head security guard and offered a polite, professional smile. "There is no need for force, Mr. Reynolds," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet of the room. "I know the way out." I began to walk toward the grand revolving doors, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. The four guards flanked me, escorting me out like a dangerous criminal. As we reached the main lobby away from the prying eyes of the investors, I stopped and turned to the security team. Reynolds tensed, preparing for a physical altercation. Instead, I calmly checked my diamond wristwatch. The gold hands indicated it was exactly 8 o'clock. "Take it easy, gentlemen," I said, keeping my tone conversational and light. "You are just doing your jobs, and I respect that. But you might want to log into your employee payroll portal at 8:15 tonight." Reynolds frowned, exchanging a confused glance with the guard next to him. "Excuse me, ma'am?" he asked, unsure how to process my calm demeanor. I smiled, stepping backward toward the exit. "The management structure of this hotel is about to undergo a massive immediate transition," I explained. "I suggest you remember who cooperated tonight because in exactly 15 minutes, you are all going to receive your paychecks from a brand new owner." Before they could ask any questions, I turned and walked through the heavy glass doors. The cool Los Angeles night air hit my face instantly, washing away the suffocating stench of my father's gala. I stepped up to the valet stand where a sleek black town car was already idling by the curb waiting for me. I slipped into the back seat, closing the door and shutting out the noise of the hotel. The first act of their destruction was complete. Now it was time to pull the trigger. The heavy reinforced door of the town car clicked shut, sealing me inside a vacuum of absolute silence. The muffled bass of the jazz band and the distant chatter of the valet stand completely vanished. I exhaled a slow, measured breath. The polite, accommodating smile I had worn inside the hotel melted away instantly. I rolled my shoulders, releasing the physical tension of pretending to be a victim. That part of the night was over. Now I was stepping back into my true element. The plush leather seats of the customized vehicle wrapped around me like a command center. A privacy partition separated me from the front seat, where my longtime driver and personal security contractor Hayes sat idling the engine. Hayes glanced at me through the rearview mirror. His expression was professional and completely devoid of judgment. "Are we moving out, Ms. Williams?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble through the intercom speaker. "Hold our position, Hayes," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the illuminated entrance of the Sterling Hotel. "Keep the engine running and the perimeter secure. We are not leaving until the demolition is complete." I reached down to the customized console between the seats and retrieved my laptop. The sleek silver machine felt like a weapon in my hands. I opened the lid and the soft glow of the screen cast sharp shadows across my face. I bypassed the standard login protocols and accessed an encrypted virtual private network that my cybersecurity team had built specifically for this evening. My fingers danced across the keyboard, executing lines of code and security clearances with practiced efficiency. I was no longer Zoya, the discarded daughter of Marcus Williams. I was Zoya, the senior advisor of acquisitions, an apex predator in a tailored gown, about to dismantle a multi-million-dollar fraud. I initiated a secure multi-point video conference. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second before dividing into a grid of 4 crisp, high-definition video feeds. My team was already waiting. These were not cheap local attorneys or standard bank tellers. They were the most ruthless, brilliant, and expensive corporate mercenaries money could buy in Manhattan, and they operated exclusively under my command. In the top left square sat Evelyn Vance, my lead corporate litigator. She sat in her glass-walled office in New York, drinking a black coffee despite the late hour on the East Coast. In the top right was David Thorne, a forensic accountant, and my primary liaison to the Federal Banking Commission. Below them were 2 senior analysts from my own firm monitoring the real-time data flows of the commercial real estate market. "Status report, Evelyn," I demanded, skipping any pleasantries or small talk. Evelyn adjusted her steel-rimmed glasses. Her face was a mask of pure concentration. "All tripwires are currently armed and fully operational, Zoya," she reported, her voice crisp and echoing slightly through the car speakers. "We have direct oversight of the escrow accounts connected to Preston's hedge fund. The documents for the mezzanine debt transfer have been digitally drafted by his legal team and are currently sitting in the queue, waiting for your father's electronic signature. They are moving incredibly fast, just as you predicted. Preston is rushing the due diligence phase completely to close the deal tonight." I smirked, staring at the flashing data metrics on the lower half of my screen. Preston always possessed a lethal combination of unearned confidence and crippling financial desperation. His massive ego convinced him that a family-related asset transfer would not require the standard rigorous audit. He assumed my father held the ultimate authority over the Sterling Hotel simply because Marcus paraded around acting like the owner. Preston never bothered to verify the underlying deed restrictions because he fundamentally disrespected my father. He viewed Marcus as a gullible target, an easy mark to secure $17 million in fast capital. That racial and class-based arrogance was exactly what I had counted on. "David, you have eyes on the incoming capital?" I asked, shifting my attention to the forensic accountant. David nodded swiftly, typing something on an unseen keyboard off-screen. "We have locked onto the routing numbers, Zoya," he confirmed. "Preston's investors are totally unaware of the impending trap. They authorized the release of the $17 million into Preston's holding account early this afternoon. That capital is currently categorized as a pending wire transfer. The moment Marcus signs the final authorization page recognizing that capital as a secondary mortgage on the hotel, the bank routing system will initiate the deposit." I leaned back against the headrest, tapping a manicured fingernail against the leather armrest. The pieces were aligning with terrifying precision. My father and Preston were currently inside that ballroom, celebrating a victory that did not exist. They were drinking expensive champagne and shaking hands with billionaires, completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing directly on a financial landmine. They thought they were outsmarting the market. In reality, they were just following the exact path I had paved for them. Evelyn leaned closer to her camera. You understand the irreversible nature of this maneuver, Zoya? She asked, her tone entirely professional. Once we trigger the legal mechanisms hidden within the trust structure, we instantly void the management clause. Your father will be permanently stripped of all administrative authority over the property. The hotel, the land, and every liquid asset will automatically revert to your sole possession. Furthermore, the secondary action will legally trap Preston's investment capital. It is a financial guillotine, but it will completely destroy them. I stared at the video feed, watching the serious faces of my highly paid team. I am fully aware of the consequences. Evelyn, I answered, my voice steady and cold. We are not just halting a business transaction tonight, we are reclaiming stolen property. Keep the surveillance open. Evelyn nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. The surveillance feed remains active, she confirmed. But I have to admit, Zoya, the sheer elegance of this trap is something they will study in law school for decades. Your mother was a visionary. I looked down at the digital rendering of the original property deed on my screen. A faint smile touched my lips as I traced the signature of a woman who had foreseen this exact betrayal. My mother did not just build an empire. I explained to the team, my voice echoing in the quiet luxury of the car. She built a fortress. When she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she knew exactly what Marcus would do the moment she was gone. She knew he would try to drain every cent of her life's work to fund his own ego and support Valerie. So she created a blind trust. David leaned into his camera, his eyes locked on the financial data. A blind trust with a poison pill clause, he added, shaking his head in admiration. It is a masterpiece of asset protection. I want to make sure the sequence of execution is perfectly aligned, I said, pulling up the trust documents alongside the live bank feeds. Let us review the mechanics one more time before the hammer drops. Evelyn, you have the floor. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, her tone shifting into full litigator mode. The structure is practically impenetrable, she began. When your mother established the trust, she placed the entire deed of the Sterling Hotel, the surrounding land, and the primary operating accounts into the entity. She granted Marcus the title of managing trustee, but stripped him of any actual ownership. He was legally permitted to operate the hotel, collect a management salary, and maintain the illusion of ownership for the public eye. However, his administrative authority was strictly conditional. And the primary condition I prompted, ensuring every detail was vocalized for absolute clarity. The primary condition, Evelyn continued, was that Marcus could never encumber leverage or sell the core assets of the trust without your explicit notarized consent once you reached the age of 30. The moment he attempts to sign a secondary mortgage or transfer equity using the hotel as collateral. Without your signature, he immediately breaches his fiduciary duty. David chimed in from the top right quadrant of my screen. That breach acts as the poison pill. The trust documents clearly state that any unauthorized attempt to leverage the property triggers an automatic and immediate revocation of his managing trustee status. Control of the trust, alongside all associated assets, instantly defaults to the sole beneficiary, which is you, Zoya. I watched the cursor blink on my screen. Marcus thinks he has been running a multi-million-dollar kingdom for the past decade, I said, my voice dropping an octave. In reality, he has just been a glorified property manager, babysitting my inheritance until I was ready to claim it. He assumed I was too ignorant or too beaten down to ever challenge his authority. He never knew my mother handed me the keys to the kingdom on my 30th birthday. But the true beauty of this demolition does not lie with your father. Evelyn interjected, a sharp smirk appearing on her face. The real spectacle is Preston. I have reviewed the merger documents his legal team drafted. The level of negligence is genuinely staggering. How does a supposedly elite hedge fund manager commit $17 million without pulling the foundational deed restrictions? I leaned back against the leather seat, letting the profound arrogance of my brother-in-law sink in. Because Preston suffers from a fatal disease, I explained, staring at the live feed of the hotel lobby. It is called white privilege, masked as old money superiority. Preston grew up in a world where his last name opened doors and bypassed security checks. He is accustomed to making deals in country clubs where a handshake between wealthy men overrides legal scrutiny. When he looked at Marcus, he did not see a shrewd businessman. He saw a desperate black man trying to play in the major leagues. Preston assumed my father owned the hotel outright because Marcus carried himself with loud, flashy arrogance. I continued keeping my eyes on the data streams. Preston never bothered to look beneath the surface because he fundamentally disrespected the people he was doing business with. He assumed a minority-owned enterprise would have a simple, unsophisticated corporate structure. He thought he was the smartest person in the room coming down from his high tower to rescue a struggling family operation. His ego convinced him that a deep forensic audit was beneath him. Why waste time on due diligence when you believe you are dealing with amateurs? David chuckled a dry, cynical sound. His investors are going to crucify him for this. He bypassed standard protocol to rush a $17 million mezzanine debt transfer. He used his client's money to secure a junior lien against a property that the signatory does not even own. Exactly, I said softly. By signing that contract, Preston is essentially wiring $17 million into a void. The moment those funds hit the hotel's escrow account to finalize the merger, the trust violations trigger. Marcus loses the hotel. The hotel becomes mine. And because the mezzanine debt was initiated under a fraudulent premise by an unauthorized signatory, the capital becomes legally trapped within the trust's defense mechanisms as collateral damage. The money will automatically freeze to protect the primary asset, which is now under my direct control. Preston is not just losing a deal, Evelyn stated, her voice laced with finality. He is committing massive financial fraud against his own investors. By neglecting his fiduciary duty to perform basic due diligence, he is legally responsible for the loss of that capital. The SEC will have a field day with him. He wanted to play the savior, I murmured, tapping my fingers on the keyboard. He wanted to use my mother's legacy to patch the holes in his failing fund and parade my sister around as his trophy. He thought he could outsmart the system because the system was built for people who look like him. But he forgot one crucial detail. What is that? Zoya David asked, watching the transaction timer tick down on his monitor. He forgot that I am the one who writes the code for the system now, I replied, my eyes locked on the digital authorization queue. My mother built the fortress, but I am the one who weaponized it. I have spent the last 10 years dissecting corporate law, structuring hostile takeovers, and destroying companies run by men exactly like Preston. He walked into a slaughterhouse thinking it was a petting zoo. A sudden sharp chime echoed through the interior of the town car. A bright red alert flashed across the center of my laptop screen. The digital authorization queue had updated. The status icon shifted from pending to active. Evelyn sat up perfectly straight, her coffee cup forgotten on her desk. The documents have just been accessed, she announced, her voice tight with anticipation. Marcus has opened the final digital portal. The bank signature interface is currently live. David immediately began typing rapidly, his eyes darting across multiple data feeds. Routing protocols are standing by. The $17 million transfer is queued at the clearinghouse. They are literally seconds away from execution. I stared at the blinking red alert. Inside that ballroom, surrounded by applause and crystal, my father was about to sign away his entire life. Preston was about to seal his own criminal indictment. Valerie and Sienna were about to lose their designer clothes and their stolen status. The years of emotional abuse, the constant belittling, the financial starvation, it was all culminating in this single digital signature. Hold the line. I commanded my team, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. Wait for the confirmation. We do not move until the ink is dry. The silence in the car was absolute. Even Hayes in the front seat seemed to stop breathing. We watched the screen as the seconds ticked by, feeling the immense weight of the trap preparing to snap shut. What happens next will permanently rewrite the history of my family. The digital authorization queue pulsed on my screen, holding the fate of everyone inside that ballroom. I visualized my father standing under the crystal chandeliers, gripping a digital stylus provided by Preston's high-priced attorneys. I knew exactly how Marcus looked in moments like this. He would be sweating slightly, trying to maintain a facade of relaxed billionaire confidence, while eager to secure his lifeline. Preston would be standing right over his shoulder, rushing him, dismissing the fine print with a wave of his hand. Neither of them realized they were signing their own execution orders. The red status icon on my laptop suddenly flashed brilliant green. A progress bar shot across the monitor, filling instantly. Signature acquired, David announced, his voice, sharp and clinical through the car speakers. Cryptographic hash verified and time-stamped. Marcus Williams has officially executed the mezzanine debt agreement. The digital ink is dry, Zoya. Evelyn leaned closer to her camera, her eyes scanning the newly uploaded document. I am reviewing the executed contract now, she said, her tone shifting into pure legal aggression. He signed it. Marcus explicitly pledged the core real estate asset of the Blind Trust as collateral for the $17 million loan. He did this without the required notarized consent of the sole beneficiary. I kept my eyes locked on the screen, my pulse steady and calm. Confirm the breach, Evelyn, I commanded. Breach confirmed, she replied instantly. Marcus Williams has shattered his fiduciary duty. He has violated the primary protective covenant of your mother's trust. The poison pill is now active and legally enforceable. David began typing at a furious pace, his monitor casting a blue glow over his face. The clearinghouse has received the executed contract, he reported. Preston's hedge fund has authorized the release of the capital. The routing protocols are engaged. We have movement, Zoya. The money is in transit. I watched the financial dashboard as a massive string of numbers materialized on the screen. The $17 million from Preston's elite investors was flowing out of their secure holding accounts and hurtling through the banking network. It was a staggering amount of capital moving entirely on the false premise created by Preston's blinding arrogance. He had convinced his investors that this deal was a guaranteed success because he thought he was playing a sophisticated game with unsophisticated people. He was wrong. The funds have cleared the Federal Reserve, David announced, his voice tight with adrenaline. They are hitting the local institutional accounts. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. The capital has landed. $17 million is now sitting inside the Sterling Hotel's primary escrow account. The transaction is fully complete. The trap had swallowed the bait. Now it was time to snap the jaws shut. I placed my fingers over the keyboard. For 10 years I had waited for this exact moment. 10 years of listening to Valerie boast about her wealth. 10 years of watching Sienna flaunt the money my mother had earned. 10 years of my father acting like a king while treating me like a peasant. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt absolute cold clarity. I opened the master control protocol on my customized interface. The system prompted me for my administrative credentials. I typed in the alphanumeric sequence I had memorized on my 30th birthday. The screen unlocked, granting me direct access to the architectural framework of the Blind Trust. I uploaded the pre-drafted legal injunctions and ownership transfer documents that Evelyn had prepared months in advance. Executing revocation protocol, I stated, my voice unwavering in the quiet car. I pressed the enter key. The system processed the command instantly. I watched the corporate hierarchy dashboard update in real time. The title of managing trustee next to Marcus Williams turned gray, flashed briefly, and then dissolved into nothingness. Evelyn provided the legal play-by-play as the automated systems did their work. Notices of termination are currently generating, she said. The system is dispatching encrypted legal notices to the state registry, the primary banking institutions, and the hotel's internal management framework. Marcus is officially stripped of all administrative power. He is no longer authorized to sign checks, approve vendor payments, access the building's financial backend, or make executive decisions. He is legally completely powerless. Ownership default sequence initiated. David chimed in, watching a different set of metrics. The trust assets are actively reverting to the sole beneficiary. I watched my own name populate the master ownership fields across the screen. Zoya Williams, the hotel, the premium commercial land it sat on, the operating accounts, the shell companies holding the adjacent parking structures. All of it flowed out of my father's phantom grasp and directly into my absolute control. The empire was finally back in the right hands. What about Preston's money? I asked, my eyes fixed on the $17 million balance sitting in my newly acquired account. Secured and quarantined. Evelyn answered, a predatory smile spreading across her face. Since the hotel now legally belongs to you and you did not authorize the debt, the lien is entirely invalid against your property. Preston holds a worthless contract. However, since his funds were deposited into your corporate account under fraudulent pretenses by the former manager, we have automatically initiated a fraud freeze protocol. The $17 million is locked tight in your accounts pending federal investigation. I leaned back against the plush leather seat, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the shift. In less than 3 minutes, I had legally and permanently severed my father from his empire. He was penniless. He had no authority. He was quite literally a trespasser standing inside my building. Take down their access, I commanded, addressing the cybersecurity analysts on the lower screen. Disable Marcus administrative keycards. Lock Valerie out of the corporate expense accounts. Cancel Sienna's black cards. Shut down their entire digital ecosystem. The analyst nodded, moving with synchronized precision. Executing overrides, one reported. Administrative keycards are deactivated. Corporate expense accounts are frozen. Credit lines are severed. They are locked out of the network, Zoya. The finality of the moment was intoxicating. I did not need to scream or cry or throw a tantrum in the middle of a ballroom to get my point across. I just needed to be smarter, sharper, and more ruthless than the people who tried to destroy me. I looked out the tinted window of the town car at the glowing facade of my hotel. Inside that building, my family was still smiling, posing for photos, and celebrating their grand success. They had no idea they were already bankrupt. I turned my attention back to the glowing screen illuminating the dim interior. The $17 million sat in the holding account, representing the pinnacle of Preston's arrogance and my father's desperation. It was time to secure the perimeter. I opened the final security gateway on my interface. This was the mechanism I had designed specifically for unauthorized capital injected into the trust. I typed the execution command for the total asset freeze. David. I said, my voice steady. Initiate the primary lock on the incoming capital. Reroute the $17 million into the blind trust's ultimate holding vault. Classify the transaction as a hostile encumbrance penalty. David typed furiously, his face illuminated by the blue light of his monitors. Executing the reroute now, Zoya, he confirmed. The funds are shifting. I am establishing the legal barricade. Because Preston wired this money based on a fraudulent signature from an unauthorized party, the banking system now recognizes the capital as a liability. By absorbing it into the trust vault, we are technically protecting the primary asset from an illegal financial maneuver. The money is locked. Preston cannot reverse the wire. He cannot recall the transaction. The capital is completely sealed inside your fortress. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, her expression transforming into a predator, admiring a fresh kill. It is a brilliant paradox, she noted. Preston cannot legally demand the money back without admitting to his wealthy investors that he failed to perform basic due diligence and wired their millions to a man who did not own the collateral. If he reports the loss, he triggers a federal investigation into his own negligence. You have not just taken his money, Zoya. You have trapped him in a legal paradox where his only option is to confess his own staggering incompetence to the very people he swore to protect. I smiled, letting the reality of the victory wash over me. Excellent work, everyone, I told my team. Maintain your surveillance protocols and alert me if their secondary accounts attempt to bypass the freeze. I will handle the personal fallout from here. I terminated the encrypted video conference. The screen on my laptop went black, instantly plunging the back seat into shadows. I closed the lid and set the heavy machine aside. Haze shifted in the driver's seat, keeping the engine idling, maintaining our vigil outside the grand entrance of my hotel. The silence inside the vehicle was profound, a stark contrast to the chaos I knew was beginning to unfold beyond those glass doors. For a long moment, nothing happened. I watched the valet attendants rushing back and forth parking vehicles for people who were currently drinking my champagne. Then, the silence was broken. My smartphone resting on the center console between the seats vibrated. The screen lit up, casting a harsh white glare across the dark cabin. It was an incoming call from my father. I did not move a single muscle. I simply watched his name flash brightly across the screen. Marcus Williams. The man who had prioritized his fake public image over his own flesh and blood. The phone vibrated continuously for 30 seconds before the call went to voicemail. 2 seconds later, the screen illuminated again. This time, it was Preston, the hedge fund manager who stood in the lobby just 30 minutes ago telling me I did not belong in the business world, was now desperately dialing my number. I watched his call time out. Then came Valerie. Her name appeared on the screen, vibrating with a frantic energy that perfectly mirrored the sheer panic I knew was aggressively gripping her chest. She was probably standing directly in the middle of the crowded ballroom, her emerald green dress suddenly feeling very tight, realizing her stolen corporate credit cards were publicly failing at the open bar. The solitary calls quickly morphed into an aggressive, relentless bombardment. The phone buzzed, vibrated, and flashed in a continuous, chaotic rhythm. Marcus again, then Preston, then Sienna. My terrible sister, the supposed golden child who had mocked me and loudly told me to avoid scratching the expensive marble floors, was now calling me back to back. Her calls were layered with desperate text messages. The notification banners slid across my bright screen in rapid succession. Zoya, pick up the phone right now. Zoya, what did you do to the accounts? Zoya, please call Dad, he is having a severe panic attack. Zoya, Preston is screaming at the bank executives, you need to answer. I picked up the device, holding it lightly in my open hand. I opened the call log and slowly scrolled through the bright red missed call icons. The sheer volume of their mounting desperation was genuinely staggering. I watched the digital counter at the top of the screen climb steadily higher. 50 missed calls, 60 missed calls, 70 missed calls. I waited patiently, letting the device vibrate against my palm, feeling the physical manifestation of their collapsing empire. When the counter hit exactly 78 missed calls, I pressed the side power button, silencing the device completely. 78 missed calls in the span of just 10 short minutes. 40 of them were from my father. He was actively watching his entire false identity disintegrate before his very eyes. He had spent his whole adult life building a fragile facade of wealth and immense power, and I had completely dismantled it with a single keystroke. 18 calls were from Preston, the arrogant savior who wrongly thought he could easily use my family to patch his sinking investment fund, was now staring down the terrifying barrel of a $17 million deficit. 20 calls were split evenly between Valerie and Sienna, two women who suddenly realized they were wearing borrowed clothes in a massive castle they definitely did not own. I leaned my tired head against the cool leather of the headrest and gently closed my eyes. The small notification light on my silenced phone continued to pulse, a silent emergency alarm in the peaceful darkness of the car. They were trapped inside that ballroom, surrounded by the very people they had tried so hard to impress, currently experiencing the most profound public humiliation of their entire, miserable lives. They had thrown me out into the cold night, believing I was utterly powerless. They never anticipated that I would take the warmth, the shelter, and the entire building away from them. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Hayes through the rearview mirror. We hold our current position, I instructed him smoothly. Let them sweat under those chandeliers a little longer. Inside the grand ballroom of the Sterling Hotel, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the intoxicating illusion of total victory. The jazz band had concluded their set, transitioning into a soft, instrumental background rhythm, perfectly designed for high-stakes networking. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided seamlessly across the polished marble floors, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of imported vintage champagne. Preston stood confidently at the center of the main stage, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass to command the attention of the room. The sharp ringing sound cut through the ambient chatter, instantly drawing the eyes of every wealthy investor, socialite, and corporate executive present. Preston adjusted his tailored suit jacket, flashing a brilliantly white, practiced smile. He radiated the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had just successfully conquered the world. Marcus stood just a few feet away, positioned slightly behind Preston, proudly beaming at the crowd. My father was soaking in the adoration, puffing out his chest, and acting as though he were a true titan of the hospitality industry. Valerie and Sienna were stationed at the front table, posing for the event photographers and making sure their designer gowns were perfectly captured from every flattering angle. They all believed they had permanently secured their elite status. Ladies and gentlemen, Preston began, his voice amplified perfectly by the state-of-the-art acoustic system. Thank you all for joining us on this magnificent evening. Tonight we are not just celebrating 30 years of the Sterling Hotel. We are celebrating a monumental leap forward in commercial real estate and strategic private equity investment. He paused dramatically, allowing his words to echo across the silent ballroom. He looked directly at Thomas Harrington and the other primary stakeholders of his hedge fund. When I first looked at this property, I saw more than just a successful family-run enterprise. I saw massive, untapped potential. I saw an opportunity to bridge the gap between historic legacy and aggressive modern capital expansion. Marcus Williams has built a beautiful foundation here, but tonight we are constructing an absolute empire. Preston raised his champagne glass high into the air, his smile widening into a predatory grin. The mezzanine debt transfer we finalized just moments ago represents a $17 million injection of pure growth capital. This merger will elevate the Sterling Hotel into a global luxury brand, and it will deliver unprecedented returns for our incredibly valued investors. I want to personally thank Marcus for his cooperation and his visionary leadership. Please join me in a toast to the future of our combined families and our combined fortunes. The crowd raised their glasses, murmuring polite agreements and preparing to drink to their impending wealth. Marcus took a step forward, ready to offer his own self-congratulatory remarks. But before a single drop of champagne could be consumed, a sharp, synchronized sound shattered the celebratory atmosphere. It did not come from the stage. It came from the audience. A distinct electronic chime echoed from the front row. It was immediately followed by another. Then 3 more. Suddenly, a wave of identical notification alerts swept through the entire ballroom. The crisp digital tones cut through the applause like shattered glass. Every major investor, every hedge fund partner, and every financial backer associated with Preston's firm instinctively reached into their tailored suit pockets and designer clutches. Thomas Harrington set his champagne flute down on a nearby cocktail table with a sharp clink. He retrieved his smartphone, adjusting his reading glasses as he squinted at the illuminated screen. His relaxed, wealthy demeanor vanished in an absolute instant. The polite smile melted off his face, replaced by a stark mask of genuine shock and immediate anger. Around him, other investors were reacting with the exact same horrified expressions. Whispers quickly broke out, transforming the elegant silence into a chaotic, buzzing hive of confusion. Preston kept his glass raised, but his confident smile began to falter at the edges. He looked out at his primary backers, expecting to see them drinking to his success. Instead, he saw 50 of the most powerful men in Los Angeles staring at their phones in total disbelief. The low murmurs rapidly escalated into loud, demanding voices. Thomas Harrington looked up from his screen, his eyes locking directly onto Preston. The older investor's face was flushed red with absolute fury. He pushed past a waiter, ignoring the spilled champagne that soaked into the expensive carpet. Preston Harrington barked his voice, cutting harshly across the growing panic of the crowd. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Preston lowered his glass entirely, his arrogant posture stiffening into rigid confusion. "I assure you, Thomas, there are no jokes tonight," Preston replied. trying to maintain a calm, professional tone over the microphone. The transaction was finalized perfectly. We just received the digital confirmation from the clearinghouse. Harrington took another step forward, closing the distance to the stage. He held his phone up, displaying a bright red, urgent notification screen for everyone nearby to see. "I am not talking about the clearinghouse, you arrogant fool!" Harrington shouted, his voice booming, without the need for any microphone. "I am talking about my personal holding accounts and the funds of every man standing in this room." The automated monitoring system just triggered a critical emergency banking alert. The $17 million we transferred into your management protocol is gone. It has completely vanished from the escrow accounts, and the federal bank is reporting a hostile encumbrance penalty. You have lost all of our capital. The entire grand ballroom erupted into total chaos as the harsh reality of their financial ruin finally set in. Investors began shouting over one another, abandoning their expensive drinks to furiously dial their own personal bankers. The polished facade of high society evaporated instantly, replaced by the raw, primal terror of wealthy men suddenly facing devastating losses. The grand celebration was officially dead and utterly destroyed. Preston stood frozen behind the microphone. The confident posture he had maintained for his entire adult life shattered under the crushing weight of 50 angry billionaires. He stared at Thomas Harrington, unable to comprehend the words being shouted at him. The microphone picked up his ragged breathing, broadcasting his rising panic to the frantic room. Marcus rushed forward, grabbing Preston's arm. "There must be a glitch in the banking portal." Marcus stammered, his voice completely lacking its usual booming authority. "The bank's systems get overwhelmed during large nighttime transfers. We just need to call the clearinghouse and verify the routing numbers." Harrington let out a bark of humorless laughter. He stepped directly onto the low stage, invading their personal space. "A glitch," he repeated, his voice dripping with pure venom. "My private bankers do not experience glitches, Marcus. I have the head of commercial lending for Chase Manhattan on the phone right now. He just pulled the emergency federal registry for this property." Harrington held his phone up to Preston's pale face. "Read it, Preston." Read the name of the sole registered owner of the Sterling Hotel. Preston squinted at the illuminated screen, his eyes darting frantically across the legal text. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat seized. "Read it aloud," Harrington demanded, grabbing Preston by the lapel of his expensive suit. "Let every investor in this room hear exactly who you just gave our money to." "Zoya Williams." Preston whispered, his voice cracking. "The deed is registered exclusively to a blind trust controlled by Zoya Williams." The name echoed through the microphone's feedback loop, hanging over the ballroom like a death sentence. Valerie, who had been rushing toward the stage, stopped dead in her tracks. Her emerald green gown suddenly looked cheap against the backdrop of an impending federal indictment. Sienna let out a high-pitched gasp, pressing her hands against her meticulously contoured face. Marcus shook his head violently, his denial instantaneous and desperate. "That is impossible," Marcus shouted, snatching the phone from Harrington's hand. "I am the managing trustee. I have the legal authority to sign for the mezzanine debt. I have run this entire empire for a decade. She is just a disgruntled child trying to hack the registry." Harrington snatched his phone back, looking at Marcus with absolute disgust. "You are not a managing trustee, Marcus. According to the federal database, your administrative privileges were permanently revoked 3 minutes ago. You do not own this hotel. You do not own the land beneath it. You do not even own the parking structure outside. You are a glorified tenant who just committed massive financial fraud." Several other investors had now crowded around the stage, forming an impenetrable wall of expensive suits and furious glares. They had trusted Preston because of his family name and his country club connections. Now they realized he had led them straight into a financial slaughterhouse. An older investor from New York pushed his way to the front, jabbing a thick finger at Preston's chest. "You told us the collateral was clean, Preston. You swore to the board that you personally supervised the due diligence on the Williams estate." Preston backed away, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I did look at the paperwork," he stammered, sweat visibly beading on his forehead. Marcus presented the corporate ledgers. The hotel was operating under his signature. I had no reason to suspect a hidden trust covenant would activate upon signing. Harrington laughed again, a terrifying sound that silenced the immediate area. You had no reason to suspect, he mocked, his tone lethal. You skipped the forensic audit because you wanted to rush the acquisition and collect your management fee. You saw a desperate man wanting to play billionaire and you thought you could exploit him for a quick turnaround. Instead, you wired $17 million of our capital directly into a hostile trust vault. Because you failed to verify the true owner, our money is now legally classified as a fraudulent encumbrance. The receiving bank has automatically frozen the funds under federal anti-money laundering protocols. We cannot pull the wire back. The money is gone. Preston looked around the room, his eyes wide with animalistic terror. His entire reputation, his family legacy, and his career evaporated in those few sentences. He looked at Sienna, who was crying hysterically by the dessert table, offering zero support. He looked at Marcus, who was staring at his own trembling hands, muttering incomprehensible denials. The elite white privilege that Preston had wielded like a weapon was entirely useless here. These investors did not care about his prep school pedigree or his golf handicap. They only cared about their missing millions, and they wanted blood. I am going to call my lawyers, Preston said, his voice shaking uncontrollably. We will file an immediate injunction. We will drag Zoya into federal court and force her to release the escrow hold. It is a misunderstanding. Harrington signaled for his private security team to approach the stage. You are not calling any lawyers on our behalf, Preston. You are entirely removed from this fund. I have already contacted the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI White-Collar Crime Division. You facilitated a multi-million-dollar wire fraud by presenting false collateral. You are going to federal prison, and Marcus will be sitting in the cell right next to you. Marcus stumbled backward, knocking a microphone stand crashing to the floor. The sharp feedback squeal made the remaining guests wince. He finally grasped the absolute reality of his situation. Zoya had not just embarrassed him, she had systematically dismantled his entire life. The ballroom, which was a monument to his manufactured success, was now the scene of his catastrophic public execution. Security guards who used to bow to Marcus stood by watching him get torn apart by the billionaires he desperately wanted to impress. The public humiliation they faced tonight was total and utterly inescapable. Valerie watched the billionaires circling her husband like sharks smelling blood in the water. Her instinct for self-preservation immediately kicked into overdrive. If Marcus and Preston were going down in flames, she needed to secure her own lifeline. She grabbed the heavy skirts of her emerald gown and pushed her way through the chaotic crowd, heading straight for the administrative wing of the hotel. She needed to access the corporate safe and drain whatever petty cash or bearer bonds were left in the emergency reserves before the authorities arrived. She reached the heavy mahogany doors of the executive suite and swiped her gold-plated master keycard against the electronic reader. Instead of the familiar soft click of unlocking the mechanism, emitted a harsh red flash and a loud rejection buzz. Valerie scowled, assuming her shaking hands had caused a read error. She swiped it again. Another angry buzz echoed in the quiet hallway. She slammed her palm against the reader, swiping the card violently a third time. The small digital display screen above the handle illuminated with a single glowing phrase: Access denied. Panic finally breached Valerie's carefully maintained composure. She abandoned the door and marched directly to the front desk, where the night manager stood watching the ballroom chaos with wide eyes. Give me your master override key right now, Valerie demanded, slamming her hand onto the marble counter. The system is malfunctioning, and I need to get into my husband's office immediately. The night manager, a young woman who had endured Valerie's condescending demands for 3 years, simply looked at her with a remarkably blank expression. She did not scramble to apologize. She did not frantically reach for her keys. Instead, she tapped her computer screen. I am sorry, Valerie, the manager said casually, dropping the formal title she usually demanded. My system shows that your administrative profile has been permanently deleted. In fact, the entire executive roster was wiped clean exactly 7 minutes ago. I cannot grant you access to the private offices because you are no longer affiliated with the ownership group. Do you know who I am? Valerie shrieked, her voice echoing across the high ceilings of the lobby. I will have you fired before you can even pack your desk. The manager smiled, a very cold, calculating smile. Actually, my new employer just sent out a company-wide memo. She turned her monitor slightly so Valerie could see the bright, bold text of an internal email. It was signed directly by Zoya Williams. The memo guaranteed a 20% bonus to all staff members who remained at their posts during the transition of power and explicitly instructed them to deny all services to Marcus, Valerie, and Sienna. You cannot fire me, the manager stated smoothly, because you do not work here anymore. While Valerie was discovering her total loss of power in the lobby, Sienna was facing her own localized nightmare near the grand buffet. The panic from the main stage had rippled outward, but Sienna was desperately trying to maintain her illusion of control. She had gathered her closest socialite friends near the towering champagne fountain, laughing too loudly and pretending the shouting billionaires were just having a standard aggressive business disagreement. Her performance was interrupted when the head of the luxury catering company approached her small circle. He held a sleek black leather folder containing the final invoice for the evening's extravagant menu. The bill included the imported beluga caviar, the rare truffles, and the hundreds of bottles of vintage champagne Sienna had personally demanded for her guests. "Excuse me, Mrs. Vance," the catering director said, his tone strictly business. "Given the unexpected disruption to the evening's schedule, my corporate office has instructed me to collect the final payment for tonight's services immediately. The remaining balance is $142,000. Sienna's friends gasped at the astronomical number, but Sienna simply tossed her hair and forced a dismissive laugh. "Oh my God, they are so dramatic," she said to her friends, rolling her eyes. "It is just a minor banking delay with the merger." She reached into her diamond-encrusted clutch and pulled out her heavy metal American Express Centurion card. She handed it to the catering director with a dramatic flourish. "Just put it on my personal account and add a 20% tip for your trouble. I do not want to deal with this administrative nonsense tonight." The director nodded, producing a mobile payment terminal from his jacket pocket. He inserted the heavy black card into the reader. The machine processed for several agonizing seconds. Then it emitted a sharp declining beep. A printed receipt slid out reading, "Transaction, declined account, frozen." Sienna's confident smile froze. Her friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. "There must be a fraud alert," she stammered, her face flushing a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. "Because it is such a large amount." "Run it again." The director ran it again. The same declining beep echoed loudly over the soft jazz music still playing in the background. He pulled the card out and handed it back to her. "I am sorry, Mom," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the surrounding guests. "The issuing bank has completely disabled this account. Do you have an alternative method of payment?" Sienna's hands began to shake uncontrollably. She dug frantically into her clutch, pulling out a platinum Visa and a sapphire premium card. She shoved both of them into the director's hands. "Just use one of these," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. The entire section of the ballroom was now watching her. The spectacle of Preston's catastrophic failure on stage was compounding with Sienna's desperate struggle at the buffet. The director ran the Visa, declined. He ran the second card, declined. He placed all three useless pieces of plastic on top of the leather folder and handed them back to her. "Every single account under your name has been liquidated and closed." "Mrs. Vance," he announced, his patience entirely evaporated. "If you cannot provide a valid form of payment within the next 10 minutes, I am instructed to contact the police for theft of services." Sienna stared at the rejected credit cards as if they were venomous snakes. Her wealthy friends, the women she had spent years trying to impress, began to physically back away from her. The social contagion of poverty and fraud was something none of them wanted to be associated with. One by one, they turned their backs and hurried toward the coat check, abandoning her completely. Valerie rushed back into the ballroom just in time to see her daughter's ultimate humiliation. The two women locked eyes across the crowded floor. The gravity of their situation crashed down on them with suffocating force. Zoya had not just taken the hotel, She had systematically severed every financial artery, keeping their luxurious lifestyle alive. They were standing in gowns that cost thousands of dollars, wearing jewelry worth small fortunes, yet they could not even afford to buy a glass of water. The dominoes had fallen with absolute mathematical precision. Marcus was trapped on stage, surrounded by furious investors, threatening him with federal prison. Preston was having a full-blown panic attack, realizing his entire career was over. Valerie was locked out of the very empire she had helped steal, and Sienna was facing imminent arrest for an unpaid catering bill. The fortress they thought they owned had transformed into a cage, and Zoya held the only key. Marcus practically tore his tailored tuxedo jacket as he pushed his way through the heavy oak doors of the kitchen service exit. The shouts of 50 furious billionaires still echoed through the hallway behind him. He was gasping for air, his chest heaving with profound terror. Moments later, Preston shoved his way through the same doors, looking like a man facing execution. His signature confident smirk had been eradicated, replaced by a sickly pale expression. Before either man could speak, Valerie rounded the corner, dragging a sobbing Sienna by the wrist. Sienna's flawless makeup was ruined by black streaks of mascara. She clutched her deactivated credit cards like dead birds. They huddled together under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the service corridor, a stark contrast to the golden luxury they had just been ejected from. "What did you do, Marcus?" Preston snarled. He lunged forward, grabbing his father-in-law by the collar. "You assured me that asset was clean. You told me the trust was a tax shelter. You just handed my entire professional future and $17 million to a disgruntled financial advisor." Marcus slapped Preston's hands away, his panic morphing into defensive rage. "Do not touch me. I had no idea she had the launch codes for the poison pill. She has been waiting for the exact moment to drop the guillotine." Valerie stepped between them, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. "Stop fighting and fix this," she screamed. "The night manager just laughed in my face. We are completely locked out of the administrative systems. We cannot even access the emergency cash reserves." Sienna buried her face in her hands. "The catering director threatened to call the police," she wailed. "My friends ran away from me. I had to leave my diamond clutch at the buffet just to stop them from calling the cops." "Call her, Marcus," Preston demanded, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. "Force her to reverse the escrow hold right now." Marcus fumbled with his device, his hands shaking violently. He pressed the phone to his ear, holding his breath. The line rang once and dumped him directly into the automated voicemail system. He dialed again, sent straight to voicemail. Preston shoved Marcus aside and dialed her number. He paced the narrow corridor, his face turning a dangerous shade of red as he listened to the same automated recording. "She is screening our calls," Preston growled, slamming his hand against a metal service cart. "She is actively watching us burn and refusing to answer." Valerie snatched her phone and started typing furiously, firing off a barrage of aggressive text messages. "She will answer me," Valerie declared, her voice trembling with misplaced authority. She would not dare ignore her own mother. Sienna let out a bitter, hysterical laugh. "You are not her mother, Valerie. You threw her out of the house to buy me a sports car. She is never going to answer you." The sheer magnitude of their collective denial was staggering. None of them paused to reflect on their own actions. Preston did not acknowledge his catastrophic failure to perform basic corporate due diligence before wiring $17 million. Marcus did not admit that he had stolen his late wife's empire. Valerie did not feel an ounce of remorse for spending the past decade treating Zoya like garbage. Instead, they seamlessly unified their fury into a single concentrated beam of hatred directed entirely at Zoya. She was the villain who had ruined their perfect lives out of pure spite. "She must have hacked the system," Marcus muttered, pacing back and forth. "She manipulated the transfer protocols. She is breaking federal law." Preston let out a harsh, humorless bark. "Breaking federal law?" he repeated. "She just weaponized a completely bulletproof blind trust against an unauthorized signature. She used the law to absolutely annihilate us." We are staring down the barrel of a massive federal indictment because you signed a fraudulent document. We are not going to stand here and let a spiteful little girl destroy our lives, Valerie declared, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. We need to go to her apartment right now. We need to look her in the eyes and demand she release those funds. Preston stopped pacing. A cold, dangerous light flickered in his eyes. Valerie is right, he said, adjusting his ruined tie. She is hiding behind a computer screen because she is a coward. We are going to her penthouse. I will threaten her with my legal team. I will tell her I am bringing a civil extortion suit that will drain every dime she has ever made. She will fold the second we put the pressure on her in person. Marcus nodded vigorously, eager to cling to any shred of hope. My car is in the VIP valet lane, he said. We will take the service elevator down to the garage and avoid the lobby. The four of them scrambled out the back exit, moving like fugitives fleeing a crime scene. They bypassed the angry mob in the grand ballroom, entirely slipping into the damp underground parking garage. The valet attendant hurried to retrieve his customized luxury sedan. They piled into the vehicle, slamming the heavy doors shut. Marcus slammed his foot on the accelerator, peeling out of the parking structure with a screech of tires. The sleek car tore through the illuminated streets of Los Angeles, cutting aggressively through the late-night traffic. The atmosphere inside the cabin was suffocatingly tense. Preston sat in the passenger seat, furiously refreshing his banking app, hoping for a miracle that would never arrive. Valerie sat in the back, muttering under her breath while Sienna silently wept. The neon lights blurred past the windows as they sped toward the affluent downtown district. They were speeding toward Zoya's luxury high-rise, driven entirely by blind rage. They genuinely thought they could just barge into her home, shout a few legal threats, and force her to surrender the keys to the empire. They had absolutely no idea that their desperate midnight chase was simply playing right into the final act of Zoya's master plan. The digital grandfather clock on my expansive marble island read exactly 11:45 p.m. My penthouse, floating 50 stories above the restless hum of downtown Los Angeles, was an absolute sanctuary of cold, calculated silence. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, sweeping view of the city's sparkling grid, but I was entirely focused on the sleek tablet resting in my lap. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chamomile tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest as I scrolled through the final legal drafts. Evelyn had worked with ruthless efficiency. The formal foreclosure documents stripping Marcus of his final remaining shell companies were fully prepared and queued for filing the moment the courts opened in the morning. I was wearing a silk robe the color of midnight, slipping into the comfortable reality that the empire my mother built was finally resting entirely in my name. The chaotic, desperate energy of the ballroom felt like a distant, irrelevant memory. I had purposefully designed my personal living space to reflect the absolute control I maintained over my professional life. Every piece of furniture, every minimalist fixture, every subtle change in lighting was meticulously curated. It was a fortress built on Wall Street bonuses and unyielding ambition. The stark contrast between my serene, wealthy environment and the absolute wreckage I knew my family was currently experiencing was deeply satisfying. They were likely scrambling through the dark, trying to salvage their shattered reputations while I was simply reviewing spreadsheets and drinking tea. The silence of the penthouse was suddenly violently interrupted. The heavy reinforced steel of my front door shuddered under the impact of a frantic, aggressive pounding. The noise echoed sharply against the marble floors, completely shattering the peaceful atmosphere. I did not flinch. I did not rush to answer. I simply set my teacup down on the coaster with practiced precision. The pounding escalated, morphing into a desperate, rhythmic hammering. It was not the polite knock of building security or a late-night delivery. It was the chaotic, unhinged sound of people who had just realized their entire world was burning down around them. I tapped the control panel integrated into the kitchen island, bringing up the live feed from the security camera positioned outside my door. The high-definition screen illuminated, revealing the pathetic spectacle unfolding in my private hallway. Marcus was leading the charge, his custom tuxedo jacket missing his tie, hanging loosely around his neck. He looked 10 years older than he had in the ballroom, his face slick with sweat and contorted with panicked rage. Behind him, Valerie was frantically pacing her emerald gown, trailing on the floor, looking like a disgraced queen who had just lost her kingdom. Sienna was leaning heavily against the wall, mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching her useless credit cards, as if they were talismans. And then there was Preston. He stood slightly apart from the family, attempting to project an aura of old money superiority, but his rigid posture and the frantic darting of his eyes betrayed his absolute terror. The sheer audacity of their arrival was almost comical. They genuinely believed that their physical presence would somehow intimidate me. They thought they could simply barge into my sanctuary, raise their voices, and demand that I undo the financial devastation they had brought upon themselves. They still operated under the delusion that I was the same vulnerable girl they had thrown out into the cold a decade ago. They failed to understand that the woman standing on the other side of this door owned the very ground they were standing on. I watched Marcus raise his fist to pound on the door again. Before his knuckles could make contact, I pressed a button on the intercom panel, allowing my voice to broadcast clearly into the hallway. "You are disturbing the peace of a highly secure residential building." I stated, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. "State your business before I instruct the concierge to have you removed for trespassing." Marcus froze, his fist hovering in midair. His eyes darted wildly, searching for the hidden camera lens. "Zoya," he barked, his voice cracking with desperation. "Open this door right now. We need to talk to you. You have made a catastrophic mistake, and we need to fix it before the banks open tomorrow morning." Valerie pushed past him, shoving her face closer to the intercom speaker. Her usual polished facade was completely obliterated. "Zoya, you listen to me!" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the corridor. "You are destroying your father's life. You are ruining your sister's future. You are going to reverse whatever illegal hack you pulled on the hotel system, and you are going to do it right now, or I swear to God, I will make you regret you were ever born." I listened to her hollow threats, letting the silence stretch for several agonizing seconds. The contrast between her frantic screaming and my absolute calm was the very definition of power. I did not owe them an explanation. I did not owe them a negotiation. But the opportunity to watch them beg inside my own home was simply too exquisite to pass up. I tapped the security panel, unlocking the deadbolt with a soft mechanical click. The heavy door swung open, revealing the four terrified people who had spent their entire lives underestimating me. The final act of their destruction was about to begin inside my living room. They pushed past the door, pouring into my foyer like an invading army. Their frantic energy clashed with the pristine stillness of my penthouse. Marcus stepped onto the imported rugs, tracking the grit of the city into my sanctuary. He stopped in the living room, sweeping his eyes over the vaulted ceilings, the custom artwork, and the floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Los Angeles skyline. Raw envy flashed across his sweating face before he quickly arranged his features into a mask of paternal authority, attempting to reclaim a dead dynamic. "Zoya," he began, dropping into that familiar, soothing baritone he used when he wanted something for nothing. "What are we doing here, sweetheart? This has gone far enough. You have made your point. You are angry about the past and wanted to show us you could flex some corporate muscle. We see you now. We recognize your success. But you cannot play dangerous games with family assets. You are putting the Williams family legacy at risk over a petty childhood grudge. We are your blood, Zoya. You need to undo whatever digital lock you placed on the escrow account right now so we can be a family." I remained seated, resting my hands in my lap. The delusion required to walk into my home and call my calculated financial execution a petty game was fascinating. Marcus believed he could charm his way out of federal wire fraud by calling me sweetheart. I simply let his words hang in the empty air until the silence became suffocating. Valerie pushed past Marcus, her emerald gown catching on the edge of my marble coffee table. She leaned forward, her face twisting into a grotesque caricature of maternal disappointment. How can you be so incredibly selfish? Valerie hissed, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. Your father worked his fingers to the bone to provide for you. And this is how you repay him. You hack his hotel and freeze the investment funds on the most important night of his life. You are trying to put your father in an early grave. The stress you are causing him could trigger a fatal heart attack. His blood is entirely on your hands. Sienna chimed in, taking her cue from her mother. She collapsed onto my pristine white sofa, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly. You ruined my life, Zoya. Sienna wailed, her voice muffled. My friends abandoned me at the buffet. The caterer humiliated me. You canceled my credit cards and left me looking like a criminal. I just wanted to celebrate my husband's big hotel merger, and you had to destroy it because you cannot stand seeing me happy. You have always been a bitter, jealous person. You need to fix my accounts right now and pay the catering bill before the police show up at my apartment. The sheer volume of their gaslighting was impressive. In minutes, they had completely rewritten reality. Marcus was the benevolent patriarch protecting a legacy. Valerie was the fiercely loyal wife defending her husband from a murderous daughter. Sienna was the innocent bystander victimized by a jealous sister. They conveniently omitted the fact that Marcus had just attempted to illegally mortgage a property he did not own. They ignored the fact that Valerie had spent years draining my mother's accounts to buy designer bags. They erased the reality that Sienna had gleefully watched security throw me out into the street just hours ago. I picked up my teacup and took a slow sip. The hot porcelain clinked softly against the saucer, making Marcus flinch. I looked directly into his desperate eyes. There is no Williams legacy, Marcus. I stated, my voice perfectly level. There was a legacy built by my mother which you spent 10 years trying to drain. You are not a patriarch protecting a family. You are a trespasser who got caught trying to sell stolen goods. The only game being played here was your pathetic attempt to pass off a blind trust as your personal piggy bank. Valerie gasped, clutching her chest. You ungrateful little witch, she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my face. We took you in. We gave you everything. You are legally obligated to release those funds. You cannot steal $17 million from Preston's investors and expect to get away with it. You are going to prison for this. We are the victims here. We are going to call the authorities and tell them you orchestrated a cyber attack against your own family. I smiled, letting a cold laugh escape my lips. You are going to call the authorities, Valerie, I asked, tilting my head. Please do. I would love to see you explain to the FBI how you are the victim after your husband forged authorization on a secondary mortgage. I would love to hear you explain why you were trying to access the corporate safe 10 minutes after the bank flagged the transaction as hostile. You are not a victim, Valerie. You are a co-conspirator in a massive financial fraud. The only reason you are standing in my living room screaming about family is because your entire luxurious life just evaporated into thin air. Marcus stepped in front of his wife, raising his hands in a placating gesture. He was sweating profusely, the heavy scent of his expensive cologne souring with fear. Zoya, please, he begged, his voice cracking. Do not do this. Do not destroy the family. I am your father. I gave you life. You owe me a conversation. You owe me a chance to explain. We can fix this together. We can draft a new agreement. You can take over the management of the hotel and Preston and I will step back. Just unfreeze the escrow account so we can pay back the investors. We can keep this entirely within the family. I promise that I will ensure you get everything you ever wanted. Please, Zoya, just give us one more chance. Preston had heard enough. He pushed Marcus aside with a physical shove that completely stripped away any remaining illusion of their partnership. Marcus stumbled backward, silencing his pathetic begging and nearly knocking over a priceless vase. Preston straightened his ruined silk tie and stepped to the forefront, his face contorted into a mask of pure aristocratic fury. He looked around my penthouse, his eyes landing on me with a mixture of absolute disgust and unearned superiority. Enough of this pathetic groveling. Preston snapped, his voice sharp and dripping with the entitlement of generations of unearned wealth. You are dealing with an amateur, Marcus. Allow me to handle this before you humiliate yourself further. Preston squared his shoulders, trying to dominate the physical space of my living room. He looked down his nose at me, reverting to the only weapon he truly understood: the crushing weight of institutional power. He believed that throwing around legal terminology and threatening my career would force me to surrender immediately. He completely underestimated the woman sitting across from him. Listen to me very carefully, Zoya. Preston began pacing slowly across my marble floor, as if he were addressing a jury of his peers. You think you have executed some brilliant tactical maneuver tonight. You think you found a clever little loophole in a dusty trust document and decided to play corporate raider. But you are completely out of your depth. You have just committed tortious interference with a highly regulated financial contract. You have violated the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. I remained perfectly still, watching him construct his own grave with every word. Preston continued, his voice rising in volume and aggressive confidence. My family has retained the most ruthless corporate litigators on the Eastern Seaboard for 3 generations. The moment the courts open tomorrow morning, my attorneys will file an emergency injunction against you for malicious disruption of commerce and civil extortion. We will drag you into federal court and freeze every single asset you possess. We will audit your personal finances, your firm, and your mother's trust until you cannot afford a cup of coffee. Valerie and Sienna watched Preston with renewed hope, their eyes wide as they clung to his aggressive posturing. Sienna even managed a smug smile, convinced her husband was about to save her stolen lifestyle and punish the sister she despised. You are a mid-level advisor, Preston sneered, weaponizing my job title as if it were a profound insult. You work for a private equity firm that relies heavily on good relationships with elite funds like mine. Do you honestly believe your managing partners will protect you when I call them tomorrow morning? I play golf with the men who sign your paychecks. I vacation with the executives who dictate your industry standing. By noon, you will be terminated for gross professional misconduct. I will personally ensure that you are blacklisted from every financial institution from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. You will never work in this sector again. Preston stopped pacing and planted himself directly in front of my coffee table. He leaned forward, placing his large hands on the glass surface, attempting to physically intimidate me with his proximity. His blue eyes were cold, merciless, and entirely blind to his own peril. You are going to log back into whatever unauthorized portal you hacked, Preston commanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. You are going to reverse the escrow hold, release the $17 million back to my management fund, and sign a full waiver of liability. If you do this right now, I might consider letting you keep your miserable little job. If you refuse, I will personally make it my life's mission to destroy you. I will sue you into absolute oblivion. I will take this penthouse. I will take your savings, and I will leave you exactly where you started, scrubbing tables and begging for handouts from people like me. Preston straightened up, brushing a piece of invisible lint from his lapel, entirely convinced he had just delivered a fatal blow. He expected me to tremble. He expected me to realize the terrifying reality of fighting a wealthy white man equipped with unlimited legal resources. He truly believed his barrage of legal jargon and threats of industry exile would break my resolve and force me to capitulate. You have exactly 60 seconds to open your laptop and fix this, Preston added, checking his luxury watch with exaggerated impatience. Or I make the phone call that ends your life. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus looked between Preston and me, sweating profusely, hoping Preston's aggressive tactics would work where his own begging had so miserably failed. Valerie crossed her arms, looking vindicated and powerful once more. Sienna lifted her chin, her false confidence entirely restored by her husband's bullying. They were all holding their breath, waiting for me to shatter under the pressure. I looked at Preston, analyzing the sheer magnitude of his ignorance. He had confidently walked into the home of an apex predator and tried to threaten her with a plastic knife. He did not know that I had spent the last 10 years legally dismantling men far more powerful and intelligent than him. He did not know that his threats of litigation were completely meaningless because his entire financial foundation was built on shifting sand. I slowly uncrossed my legs and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I looked directly into Preston's arrogant blue eyes, preparing to strip away every single ounce of his false superiority. The time for listening was over. I watched the seconds tick down on the grandfather clock. 10, 20, 30. Preston kept his arrogant stance, but a tiny muscle near his jaw began to twitch. 40, 50, 60. The minute expired, and I had not even glanced at my laptop. I simply sat there, letting the heavy silence stretch until the air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. The absolute absence of my fear was the one variable Preston had never calculated into his pathetic equation. "Your 60 seconds are up, Preston," I said, my voice a low, smooth hum that carried perfectly across the marble floor. "Are you going to make the phone call now, or should I wait for you to compose yourself?" Preston blinked, his confident facade cracking just a fraction of an inch. "Do not test me, Zoya. I will ruin you." "You cannot ruin someone who owns the building you are currently trespassing in," I replied, shifting my gaze from his ruined tie to his terrified eyes. "You walked into my home and threatened me with tortious interference. You clearly skipped a few classes in law school, Preston. Tortious interference requires a valid contract. You do not have one. You have a worthless piece of paper signed by a man who possessed zero legal authority to pledge that collateral. You cannot sue me for protecting an asset that is legally registered entirely in my name." Marcus opened his mouth to object, but I raised a single finger, silencing him instantly. "It is my turn to speak, Marcus," I commanded. "The time for your pathetic excuses ended the moment you forged your authorization on that secondary mortgage." I turned my attention back to my brother-in-law. "Let us talk about those ruthless corporate litigators you mentioned, Preston. The ones your family has supposedly retained for 3 generations. Do you know what happens when top-tier defense firms review a case where the plaintiff wired $17 million without pulling a basic title search? They laugh you out of the boardroom. They will not take your case because you are a walking liability. You violated your fiduciary duty to your own investors to push a sloppy, desperate merger. Any lawyer worth their hourly rate will tell you that suing me is legal suicide." Valerie stepped forward, attempting to reclaim some of the ground Preston had just lost. "You cannot talk to him like that," Valerie shouted, her voice lacking its previous venom. "He is a respected hedge fund manager." "He is a fraud, Valerie," I shot back, my tone turning completely glacial. "And so are you. You stand in my living room wearing a designer gown paid for by my mother's, sweat demanding respect you have never earned. You threatened to call the police on me earlier. I invite you to do it. Call the police, Valerie. Tell them you are locked out of a hotel you do not own. Tell them you want to report a cyber attack because your stolen credit cards were declined at the bar. Please let me watch you explain to the authorities how you have been bleeding an estate dry for a decade." Sienna let out a choked sob, clutching Preston's arm with trembling hands. "Make her stop, Preston," she pleaded. "Make her give the money back. My friends are laughing at me." I focused my gaze on my sister, the golden child who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself. "Nobody is laughing at you, Sienna," I said softly. "They are running away from you. There is a massive difference. You built your entire identity on the illusion of limitless wealth. You mocked my clothes, my job, and my life because you thought your proximity to Marcus and Preston made you untouchable. But you are nothing without their stolen money. You are standing in my penthouse crying over a catering bill while your husband faces a federal investigation. You are not a victim. You are just a parasite who finally ran out of a host." Preston slammed his hand against the coffee table, his face a chaotic mix of rage and absolute panic. "Shut up!" he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You do not know anything about my fund. You do not know the people I work for. I will have you fired by noon tomorrow. I play golf with your managing partners." I actually laughed then, a sharp, genuine sound that made all 4 of them recoil. "You play golf with managing partners," I repeated, shaking my head at his staggering ignorance. "Preston, you really should have done a simple background check before coming here to threaten my career." I do not just work at my firm. I am the senior advisor of acquisitions. I orchestrate hostile takeovers for international conglomerates. The men you play golf with call me when they need to slaughter a failing competitor. I am the apex predator in the ecosystem you are desperately trying to survive in. If you attempt to leverage your country club connections to have me terminated, my partners will crush your entire portfolio before lunchtime just to keep me happy. You are a small fish in a very small pond, and you just swam into the jaws of a leviathan. Marcus sank onto the edge of my white sofa, his legs giving out completely. He put his head in his hands, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Zoya, please," he gasped, sounding like a drowning man. "We will leave. We will walk away from the hotel. Just release the 17 million back to Preston. If you keep it, his investors will destroy him and they will take me down with him. You have proven your point. You won." I looked at the man who had abandoned me, who had chosen his mistress over his daughter, who had stood by while security guards dragged me out of my own mother's legacy. The dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. They had barged in as conquerors, demanding my surrender. Now they were broken, desperate shells begging for a mercy they had never once shown me. Every ounce of their unearned confidence had been systematically stripped away, leaving nothing but raw, unadulterated fear. "I have not proven my point, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Because you still think this is just about the hotel. You still think this is a simple financial dispute. You think returning that money will save you, and you think Preston is an innocent victim of my sudden legal maneuvering." I picked up a thick manila folder resting on the edge of the coffee table. The tension in the room hit an absolute breaking point. The air crackled with raw kinetic energy. Preston stared at the folder, his arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by a terrifying realization that I was holding his actual destruction in my hands. His breathing hitched, his eyes wide and fixed on the thick stack of papers. "I am not going to release those funds, Preston," I stated, locking eyes with him, leaning forward slightly to deliver the final killing blow. "Because I know exactly why you needed my hotel in the first place. I know what you have been hiding from your investors. And I know why your family wealth is nothing but a ghost story. Let us talk about your bankrupt fund." I tossed the thick manila folder onto the center of the glass coffee table. The heavy smack echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Preston flinched, stepping backward, as if the paperwork itself were radioactive. I did not break eye contact with him. My gaze remained locked on his pale, sweating face. "For all your posturing about elite society and old money, you left a remarkably messy paper trail, Preston. You see, when a man who claims to manage billions suddenly rushes a $17 million loan through a shady back channel without proper due diligence, people in my profession tend to ask questions. I started asking those specific questions 2 full years ago." I opened the folder, sliding a stack of financial reports across the glass toward him. They were heavily redacted bank statements, internal audits, and offshore tax filings that my forensic accounting team had spent months acquiring. "Go ahead, Preston," I urged, gesturing toward the documents. "Tell your wife about your massive family fortune. Tell my father about the prestigious legacy he was so desperate to align himself with." Preston stared at the papers, his jaw working silently, but no words came out. "Since you are suddenly at a loss for words, I will explain it to them," I said, leaning back into the sofa. "Preston's family fund has been totally bankrupt for 5 consecutive years." Sienna let out a confused, nervous laugh. "That is ridiculous," she stammered, looking at her husband for reassurance. "Preston bought me a diamond necklace yesterday. His family owns an estate in the Hamptons." "They do not own the estate anymore, Sienna," I corrected sharply. "The bank owns it." Preston's father leveraged their entire portfolio on a series of disastrous commercial real estate gambles a decade ago. The fund has been hemorrhaging capital ever since. Preston has been playing a massive shell game, moving money from new investors to pay off the old ones just to keep the lights on and maintain his expensive country club memberships. He is running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, and it is finally collapsing right now. Marcus stared at Preston, his face slack with terror. You told me your fund was oversubscribed, Marcus whispered. You said you were doing me a massive favor by partnering with the hotel. I let out a harsh, unyielding laugh. He targeted you, Marcus, because you were an incredibly easy mark. He saw a man desperate for white elite validation, and he played you perfectly. He married Sienna to gain direct proximity to the Williams estate. The entire merger was nothing but a desperate bailout. Preston intended to secure that secondary mortgage, drain the capital from the hotel operations, and funnel the cash directly into his failing hedge fund to cover up the missing investor money. He was going to bleed my mother's legacy entirely dry to save his own skin. Preston shook his head violently, stepping away from the table. You cannot prove any of this, he sputtered, his voice high-pitched and frantic. These documents are circumstantial. My investors still trust me entirely. I can fix this. You cannot fix anything, Preston, I stated, my voice dropping into a lethal register. Because you just made the fatal mistake of wiring $17 million of other people's money across state lines under completely fraudulent pretenses. When you authorized that transfer using an illegal signature, you committed federal wire fraud. And because I froze those funds using a hostile encumbrance classification, my banking system automatically generated a legally binding suspicious activity report. I watched the last remaining ounce of hope drain completely from Preston's eyes. That report was instantly transmitted to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I continued driving the final nail into his coffin. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI White-Collar Crime Division have already been notified. They are not just investigating the hotel merger, Preston. The freeze triggered a comprehensive forensic audit of your entire corporate structure. By the time the sun comes up tomorrow morning, federal agents will be walking into your pristine offices with search warrants. They will seize your servers, your ledgers, and all your personal assets. You are not going to be blacklisting me from Wall Street. You are going to be sitting in a federal holding cell answering questions about where your clients' billions actually went. Sienna let out a piercing shriek, grabbing Preston's arm and violently shaking him. Tell me she is lying, Preston. Tell me we are not broke. Tell me you did not marry me just to steal from my family. She hammered her fists against his chest, but he did not even look at her. He stared blankly at the floor, completely broken and defeated. You married a total fraud, Sienna, I said mercilessly. He does not have a private jet. He does not have a trust fund. The diamonds he bought you were purchased with stolen money, and the federal government will be repossessing them very soon. You traded away your sister and your dignity for a man who is legally completely destitute. Marcus buried his face in his hands, letting out a low, guttural groan of despair. He had traded everything, my mother's empire, his relationship with me, his own self-respect, just to grovel at the feet of a white man who was actually a desperate beggar in a tailored suit. He had allowed this malicious fraudster to disrespect me in the lobby of our hotel, blinded by his own pathetic obsession with status and wealth. The irony was absolute perfection. I had not just defeated them tonight, I had brutally exposed the rotten, hollow core of their entire existence. The arrogant king of Wall Street was nothing but a common thief, and the proud patriarch was just a foolish pawn in a game he never understood. His grand delusions of entering the absolute elite echelons of society had officially resulted in his absolute personal ruination, leaving him standing completely powerless inside my home. The echo of my final words hung heavily in the space, suffocating the remaining defiance out of the men. I let them steep in their absolute despair for a moment, watching Preston hyperventilate while my father continued to stare at his shoes. I turned my attention away from the ruined patriarch and the fraudulent hedge fund manager. My gaze locked directly onto the two women huddled near the edge of my pristine white sofa. Valerie and Sienna had spent the last 20 minutes watching their golden tickets disintegrate. Now it was time to burn down the counterfeit castle they had built for themselves. Valerie saw the shift in my posture and immediately scrambled backward, her emerald gown bunching up around her ankles. She raised her hands, palms facing outward in a pathetic attempt to ward off the incoming assault. Zoya, whatever Preston did has nothing to do with us, Valerie stammered, her voice tight and trembling. Your father made a bad business decision. Preston lied to all of us. Sienna and I are innocent victims in this mess. We had absolutely no idea the merger was a scam. You cannot punish your sister for her husband's criminal behavior. I reached into the leather briefcase resting beside the coffee table and withdrew a second, significantly thicker manila folder. I dropped it onto the glass surface, right next to Preston's financial death warrant. I am not punishing Sienna for Preston's crimes, Valerie. I replied, my voice as smooth and sharp as a scalpel. I am punishing you for your own dirty crimes. You see, while my forensic accountants were busy digging through Preston's offshore accounts, I decided to have them run a comprehensive internal audit of the Sterling Hotel's operational ledgers. Specifically, I instructed them to look into the charitable initiatives my mother established before she died. Valerie's face instantly drained of all color. The fake maternal concern vanished, replaced by the stark, undeniable terror of a thief caught red-handed. My mother was a woman who believed in lifting up the community. I continued stepping around the coffee table to close the distance between us. She established the Sterling Employee Scholarship Fund to ensure that the children of the maids, the bellhops, and the kitchen staff could afford a college education. It was her proudest philanthropic achievement. When Marcus took over, he appointed you, Valerie, as the primary administrator of that charitable trust. I nudged the folder across the glass toward her. Sienna stopped crying and looked down at the stack of papers, confusion masking her tear-streaked face. I urge you to open that folder, Sienna, I commanded. Take a good hard look at the banking records your mother desperately tried to hide behind shell companies and falsified vendor invoices. Over the past 7 years, Valerie has systematically embezzled $3.2 million from the Employee Scholarship Fund. She drained the educational futures of hundreds of hardworking families just to finance your lavish, fake lifestyle. Sienna reached out with a shaking hand and flipped open the heavy cover. She stared at the highlighted bank transfers, the matching dates, and the staggering withdrawal amounts. You thought you were a natural-born socialite, Sienna. I mocked her, walking slowly around the sofa to trap them entirely in my space. You thought Marcus was just generously rewarding his favorite daughter? Read the transaction lines. The $75,000 initiation fee for your elite sorority. That was stolen directly from the college fund of the head concierge's twin daughters. Your luxury summer trips to Paris and Milan. Those flights were paid for by stealing the textbook stipends of the housekeeping staff. Even the custom diamond necklace you are wearing right now, the one you flaunted in the lobby earlier, was purchased by draining the emergency medical reserve intended for hotel employees. Sienna's hands trembled so violently that the papers slipped from her grasp, scattering across the marble floor. She looked at her mother, her eyes wide with horror and betrayal. "Mom," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this true? Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not steal from the maids to buy my clothes." Valerie could not look at her own daughter. She stared at the wall, her jaw trembling, entirely unable to formulate a lie that could withstand the crushing weight of the paper trail scattered at her feet. "You loved looking down on me, Sienna," I said, my voice devoid of any mercy. "You loved parading your brand new cars and your designer wardrobes in front of my face while I worked double shifts just to pay for my community college tuition. You called me a failure. You called me pathetic. You told your wealthy friends that I was an embarrassment to the family name. But everything you have, every single ounce of your supposed elite status, is completely stolen. You are not a high society princess. You are the direct beneficiary of a massive corporate embezzlement scheme. You are wearing stolen goods." "I did it for the family!" Valerie suddenly shrieked, breaking her silence. She glared at me, tears of angry desperation spilling over her heavily made-up eyelashes. Marcus was ignoring us. He was pouring all the hotel profits back into expansion. Sienna needed to look the part. She needed to fit in with the right crowds to secure a good marriage. I took that money to ensure she had a future. Those maids and bellhops do not need luxury educations. My daughter deserved to be among the elite. "Your daughter is currently married to a broke fraudster going to federal prison," I reminded her sharply. instantly shutting down her psychotic justification. And you, Valerie, are going to be joining him in the exact same federal system. Embezzling $3 million from a registered charitable foundation is not a minor accounting error. It is a severe felony. I have already submitted this entire dossier to the State Attorney General's office. The Hotel Workers Union is actively preparing a massive class action lawsuit against you personally. Sienna let out a choked, agonizing wail and physically scrambled away from her mother, pressing herself into the far corner of the sofa. She reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace, ripping it from her throat and throwing it onto the glass table as if it were burning her skin. She finally understood the absolute totality of her ruination. She had no husband to save her. She had no father with power. Her mother was a criminal facing prison time. Her entire identity was a manufactured illusion funded by the very people she used to order around. I looked down at the two women who had made my adolescence a living nightmare. They were completely stripped of their armor, naked in their corruption, and fundamentally destroyed. "You spent 10 years treating me like dirt," I stated, my voice resonating with absolute finality. "You told me I was useless because I did not fit your mold of perfection. But your perfection was just a parasite feeding on my mother's legacy. Tonight the parasite starves. The golden child is officially bankrupt, and the wicked stepmother is going to jail." The crushing silence that followed Valerie's exposure was broken only by the pathetic sound of Sienna's weeping. I slowly turned my back on the two women, dismissing them entirely from my focus. They were already ruined legally and socially eliminated from the board. Only one piece remained. I looked down at my father slumped on the white sofa. Marcus looked hollowed out. The charismatic hotel tycoon had been replaced by a terrified aging man standing at the edge of a bottomless cliff. He looked up at me, his eyes red and brimming with unshed tears. When he spoke, his voice was a fragile, desperate whisper. "Zoya, please," he begged, sliding off the sofa until his knees hit the marble floor. Seeing my proud, arrogant father physically kneeling before me elicited absolutely no sympathy in my heart. He reached out, grasping the hem of my silk robe. "You have to stop this. You have taken the hotel. You have exposed Preston. You have ruined Valerie. Is that not enough, Zoya? I am your father. I am your flesh and blood. You cannot send me to federal prison. I will not survive it." I stepped back, pulling the fabric from his hands. He lost his balance, catching himself on the coffee table. "We are family," Zoya Marcus pleaded, tears spilling over his cheeks. "I know I made mistakes. I know I neglected you. But I loved your mother. I loved her so much. I built that hotel to honor her memory. You are her daughter. You carry her spirit. She would never want you to destroy the family she left behind. She would want us to forgive each other. She would want us to heal." I stared down at him, feeling a profound surge of disgust. Invoking my mother's name as a shield for his cowardice was the final, unforgivable offense. "Do not ever speak her name again," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "Do not pretend you loved her while trying to steal her legacy. You think you are the victim, Marcus. You think I am the one who orchestrated your downfall tonight. But you are completely wrong. I am just the executioner. The architect of your destruction was the very woman you claim to have loved." Marcus froze, his tearful eyes widening in pure confusion. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, looking up at me. I walked to the kitchen island, picking up my teacup. I took a slow sip before delivering the truth that would permanently shatter his reality. "You spent the last 10 years believing you were a master manipulator," I said, setting the cup down. "You thought you were clever, sneaking Valerie into the hotel, funneling money offshore, and carrying on an affair while my mother was undergoing chemotherapy. You truly believed she was blind to your infidelity." Valerie gasped from the corner, her hands flying to her mouth. Marcus turned pale, the color draining from his face. She knew I stated the words, striking him like physical blows. My mother knew about Valerie. She knew about the stolen funds. She knew you were planning to replace her the second she took her final breath. But unlike you, my mother was not driven by petty emotions. She was a brilliant strategist. She knew confronting you would drag her through an exhausting divorce, where you would claim half her assets. So she chose to remain silent. She chose to let you believe you had won. Marcus shook his head in violent denial, gripping the coffee table. No, he whispered. No, she trusted me. She trusted you to be exactly the greedy, arrogant fool you are, I corrected mercilessly. That is why she created the blind trust. She specifically engineered the legal structure to act as a delayed trap. She gave you the title of managing trustee because she knew your ego would demand the spotlight. She knew you would leverage her assets to fund your desperate need for validation. She predicted you would mortgage the hotel and built the poison pill to trigger the moment you fell into that exact trap. My mother did not leave you an empire, Marcus. She left you a loaded gun knowing you were stupid enough to pull the trigger yourself. The absolute devastation on his face was a masterpiece. Every delusion about his intelligence and control evaporated. He realized he was nothing but a pawn in his late wife's vindictive chess game. He spent a decade parading as a king, unaware he was just a prisoner waiting for his execution date. You have nothing, I told him, delivering the final verdict. You have no money. You have no property. You have no reputation. You are a broke, unemployed fraud facing a federal indictment. And you have absolutely no family left to save you. I turned away from his sobbing form and pressed a button on my security panel. Within seconds, the heavy mahogany door of my penthouse swung open. 4 of my private security contractors stepped into the foyer. They were not the hotel guards he was accustomed to bullying. These were former military operatives wearing tactical suits and expressions of absolute zero tolerance. Escort these trespassers off my property, I instructed the lead contractor, my voice crisp and professional. If they resist, you have my full authorization to use whatever force is necessary. Notify the concierge that these 4 individuals are permanently banned from the premises. The guards moved swiftly, descending upon the shattered family with clinical precision. Preston attempted to shove a guard away, sputtering threats about his lawyers, but was immediately neutralized, his arm twisted behind his back as he was marched toward the door. Sienna screamed hysterically, her expensive heels dragging across the marble floor as she was practically carried out by her elbows. Valerie sobbed uncontrollably, begging the guards to let her gather her things, but they ignored her, pushing her firmly out of the penthouse. Marcus was the last to go. A guard hauled him to his feet by the collar of his ruined tuxedo. He looked back at me one final time, his face a portrait of absolute ruin. I met his gaze without a single ounce of pity. I reached out and calmly pushed the heavy door shut, sealing them out of my life forever. The satisfying metallic click of the heavy steel deadbolt locking into place echoed loudly through the quiet penthouse, signaling the absolute permanent end of the long war. The morning sun broke across the Los Angeles skyline, casting long golden rays through my floor-to-ceiling windows. I stood in my kitchen holding a fresh cup of matcha tea, entirely undisturbed by the hurricane ripping through the financial district just a few miles away. The silence of my penthouse was a stark contrast to the aggressive screaming I knew was echoing across various police precincts and lawyers' offices. This morning I tapped the remote control resting on the marble island, bringing the massive flat-screen television to life. The financial news networks were having an absolute field day. The breaking news ticker crawling across the bottom of the screen read in bold red letters, "Massive hedge fund collapse, $17 million wire fraud investigated." The anchor, a sharp-looking woman in a tailored suit, delivered the details with ruthless efficiency. She outlined how Preston's elite investment firm was currently being raided by federal agents. The camera cut to live helicopter footage showing dozens of men in dark windbreakers carrying boxes of hard drives out of Preston's pristine glass office building. The anchor detailed the breathtaking negligence of the mezzanine debt transfer, highlighting his catastrophic failure to perform verification. Preston was publicly branded a fraud, his entire reputation incinerated on live television. Evelyn called me precisely at 8 o'clock. I answered, placing her on speakerphone while I arranged fresh fruit on a plate. The fallout is magnificent, Zoya. She reported, her voice buzzing with professional satisfaction. The SEC froze every single operational account tied to Preston's fund at dawn. His investors are actively filing a massive class action lawsuit against him personally. The authorities pulled him out of a rented hotel room 2 hours ago in handcuffs. He is currently sitting in a federal holding cell waiting arraignment. And my father? I asked, slicing a strawberry with calm precision. Marcus is entirely ruined, Evelyn continued. The news of his unauthorized signature leaked to the hospitality trade papers. The Sterling Hotel Board, which you now legally control, formally issued his termination notice at 7 this morning because he attempted to fraudulently encumber a property he did not own. His corporate indemnification is completely void. He is personally liable for the legal fallout. He and Valerie are currently stranded at a cheap motel near the airport because their shared accounts are frozen tight, the destruction of their false empire moving faster than even I had anticipated. The facade of their perfect family unit had shattered the moment the steel deadbolt clicked shut on my penthouse door last night. According to the updates David sent me shortly after Evelyn's call, the rats were already aggressively turning on each other in a desperate bid for survival. Preston was reportedly screaming at his defense attorney, claiming Marcus intentionally orchestrated the entire fraud to steal the hedge fund capital. Preston planned to throw his father-in-law directly under the bus, hoping to secure a lighter sentence for his staggering negligence. Sienna was faring no better, without Preston's stolen money to shield her. The reality of her situation had crashed down with brutal force. David informed me that her landlord had immediately served her with a formal eviction notice this morning, after her rent check bounced for the third consecutive month. She tried to flee to her mother's side, but Valerie had zero resources left to offer. In a move of pure, desperate selfishness, Valerie had entirely abandoned her golden child. Valerie was currently attempting to secure a divorce attorney, hoping to legally sever herself from Marcus before the indictments dropped. She falsely believed she could walk away clean by claiming she was an innocent victim of her husband's financial illiteracy. Valerie completely forgot about the massive embezzlement dossier currently sitting on the desk of the state attorney general. Her desperate attempt to jump ship was entirely pointless. The hotel workers' union had just filed their civil suit against her for draining the employee scholarship fund. She would not be escaping anything. She was going to face the absolute wrath of hundreds of families she had deliberately robbed. The pristine high society life she had violently clawed her way into had dissolved, leaving her facing severe criminal charges and massive public disgrace. I turned off the television, the screen fading to black. The noise of their destruction was satisfying, but I had no desire to bask in it any longer. I had spent 10 agonizing years carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of their emotional abuse. I had allowed their constant belittling to fuel my relentless ambition. But looking at the silent screen, I realized I no longer needed that fuel. They were no longer a driving force in my life. They were simply a closed case file. The authorities would spend the next several years dissecting the rotting carcass of Preston's hedge fund and Marcus manufactured empire. There would be lengthy trials, aggressive depositions, and humiliating public testimonies. Marcus would watch his elite country club friends actively pretend they had never met him. Sienna would have to find a minimum wage job just to afford a cramped apartment. They would spend the rest of their miserable lives tearing each other apart, trying to assign blame for a catastrophe they had collectively built with their own greed. I picked up my teacup and walked toward the expansive windows looking down at the bustling city below. I had not just reclaimed my mother's stolen legacy, I had surgically excised a toxic infection from my life. The fear and insecurity that had haunted me since college were completely eradicated. They thought they could discard me like trash, but I had returned as an absolute force of nature to reclaim my throne. The morning sun continued to rise, burning away the last remaining shadows of my past. I was no longer a victim. I was the undisputed architect of my own incredibly bright and entirely unencumbered future, effectively terminating their reign of terror, completely and forever right now. 6 months passed since that explosive night in my penthouse. The crisp morning air of Los Angeles felt entirely different today as I stood on the pavement directly across the street from the main entrance of my property. I pulled my tailored cashmere coat tighter around my shoulders, holding a steaming cup of artisan coffee. I was not hiding in the shadows anymore. I was standing in broad daylight watching an incredible physical transformation take place right before my eyes. A massive construction crew had been working through the night and the heavy metal scaffolding was finally coming down. The old, gaudy gold lettering that proudly spelled out the Sterling Hotel had been violently ripped from the stone facade weeks ago. Marcus had chosen that name to sound elite and aristocratic, a desperate attempt to mimic the old money families he so pathetically worshipped. Today, the real legacy was being permanently cemented into the architecture. I watched as the heavy cranes carefully lowered the massive protective tarps. The new signage gleamed in the brilliant California sunlight. The Celeste Williams Hotel. My mother's name cast in solid brushed platinum now dominated the skyline. She was a woman of profound intelligence and unyielding grace, who had built this empire brick by brick. Marcus and Valerie had spent a decade trying to erase her memory, trying to scrub her fingerprints off the business she had painstakingly birthed. They thought they could simply replace her and steal her life's work to fund their own delusions of grandeur. But concrete and steel hold deep memories, and legal documents hold absolute power. Looking up at her name shining brightly against the blue sky, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over my entire body. I had finally brought her home. The revolving brass doors of the hotel spun smoothly, and my newly appointed general manager stepped out onto the sidewalk to greet me. She was a brilliant black woman whom I had personally poached from a competing luxury brand. She handed me the updated quarterly financial reports with a warm, respectful smile. Under our new leadership, the hotel was thriving. The first executive action I took upon assuming ownership was to fully restore the employee scholarship fund that Valerie had so callously drained. We not only replenished the stolen $3 million, but we doubled the endowment. The children of the housekeeping staff, the bellhops and the kitchen workers were once again receiving full tuition grants for their college educations. The toxic culture of fear and elitism that Marcus had cultivated was completely eradicated. We replaced it with an environment of genuine respect and equitable compensation. The staff did not just work for me, they fought for me because they knew I was fighting fiercely for them. I walked through those grand front doors, stepping onto the polished marble floors where security guards had once aggressively dragged me away. The same guards now nodded respectfully as I passed. They knew exactly who held the power, and they knew that power was wielded with absolute fairness. I did not fire them for following my father's orders that night. I simply showed them what a real leader looked like. As I rode the private glass elevator up to my executive suite, I looked out over the sprawling city. I thought about the scared, exhausted 22-year-old girl who had been kicked out of her own home with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. I had spent so many sleepless nights in cheap studio apartments crying over my textbooks, wondering why my family did not love me enough to protect me. I used to agonize over what I had done wrong to deserve their vicious emotional abandonment. It took me a decade of ruthless corporate warfare to realize the absolute truth. I had done nothing wrong. My only crime was existing as a mirror that reflected their own profound inadequacies. My ambition threatened Marcus. My intelligence terrified Valerie. My independence exposed Sienna's fundamental uselessness. They broke me down because they needed me to be small so they could feel incredibly large. But you cannot permanently cage a woman who learns how to manufacture her own keys. Financial independence is not just about buying expensive evening gowns or securing luxury penthouses. For women like me, for the scapegoats and the forgotten daughters, money is impenetrable armor. Capital is the ultimate boundary that no toxic family member can ever cross. Preston firmly believed that his white privilege and his generational wealth made him completely invincible. He thought he could walk into my world, disrespect my bloodline, and steal my assets without facing a single consequence. I taught him the most brutal lesson of his entire life. I taught him that the market does not care about your country club memberships or your fragile male ego. When the contracts are ironclad and the traps are set correctly, capital has absolutely no loyalty to race or gender. I outsmarted him not by playing his loud, arrogant game, but by mastering the quiet, lethal execution of the law. I stepped into my expansive office, sitting behind a massive desk carved from solid mahogany. I opened my laptop, ready to review the next hostile takeover target for my private equity firm. The Williams family drama was completely closed. I do not track Marcus or Valerie or Sienna anymore. Any letters sent from their cheap rental apartments or their respective legal counsels are automatically returned to sender by my mailroom staff. I do not care if they are sorry. I do not care if they regret their actions. Indifference is the ultimate form of closure. They no longer exist in my universe. If you are watching this video and you recognize your own pain in my story, I want you to listen to me very carefully. If you are the black sheep, the discarded child, the one they constantly belittle to prop up their own fragile egos, you need to stop seeking their validation right now. Stop arguing with people who are absolutely committed to misunderstanding you. Stop begging for a seat at a table where they serve nothing but disrespect and poison. You owe them absolutely nothing. Take your grief, take your anger, and forge it into an unstoppable weapon. Build your empire entirely in the dark. Educate yourself fiercely. Learn the complicated rules of the games they think you are too weak to play. Save your money, protect your peace, and construct a fortress around your heart. Let them mock your current struggles. Let them laugh at your boundaries. Let them parade around pretending they have won. Because true power does not need to scream to be heard. You do not need to throw a tantrum to prove your worth. When the timing is absolutely perfect and the trap is fully set, you do not even need to raise your voice. You just buy the stage they are standing on and you turn off the lights. Let your undeniable blinding success be the final word. The story of Zoya's meticulously executed triumph serves as a masterful blueprint for anyone who has ever been cast aside by their own family. The most profound lesson hidden beneath the corporate espionage and financial checkmates is the transformative power of silent, self-reliant independence. For years, Zoya endured severe emotional abuse, financial starvation, and blatant disrespect from the very people who were supposed to protect and nurture her. Yet instead of wasting her precious energy screaming for fairness in a house that actively thrived on her subjugation, she walked away and built her own fortress from the ground up. Society often conditions us to believe that blood ties are unbreakable, pushing victims of toxic dynamics to constantly seek reconciliation or demand closure through apologies that will simply never arrive. Zoya's journey teaches us a harsh but liberating truth. True closure is not a dramatic, tear-filled reunion. It is absolute indifference. It is the realization that your fundamental worth is not tethered to the validation of people who are absolutely committed to misunderstanding you. By choosing to educate herself fiercely and master the complex rules of the world that once excluded her, Zoya turned her deepest vulnerabilities into impenetrable armor. Financial independence and rigid emotional boundaries are not just tools for basic survival, they are the ultimate undeniable shields against manipulation and control. When you finally stop negotiating your value with those who consistently belittle your existence, you free up the immense energy needed to construct your own reality. Zoya did not need to shout to prove her worth. She simply bought the stage her abusers stood on and turned off the lights. Her story stands as a brilliant testament that the most devastating response to lifelong cruelty is untouchable, quiet success. Stop begging for a seat at a toxic table and instead invest your energy into building your own empire in the dark.